My guest today is accustomed to often being in the headlines. Mostly these days, everybody's talking about whether your vocabulary is as good and as complicated as Shashi Tharoor's. But there's a better reason to be speaking to him today, and that's his much talked about book, Why I Am a Hindu. It comes at an extremely interesting time, at a time when many believe that the Congress and many Indian liberals are actually reviewing their traditional constructs of secularism and their interface with faith. Shashi, welcome to this conversation. Skeptics would say, and since we're talking about faith, I have to bring skeptics in. Skeptics would say, why am I Hindu in what could be an election year, or certainly the countdown to elections has begun, that there is a larger political context to the timing, that something in the political environment has compelled Shashi Tharoor to suddenly re-embrace, or at least publicly embrace, the fact that he's Hindu. Why is this book now?
So I know that's being said, Barkha, but the fact is it's neither sudden nor a re-embrace, because in fact, those who've read me over, and I have a long paper trail of over 3 decades, those who've read me over the years know that many of these themes had been present in my writing in the past. The great Indian novel with its emphasis on dharma, some of the stories in the $5 Smile. My book 20 years ago called India from Midnight to the Millennium, in which I explicitly raise some of these concerns 5 years after the Babri Masjid tragedy, or in fact I was writing 4 years after the Babri Masjid tragedy. So looking back on all of this, I felt that I had touched upon themes relating to my beliefs and to the way in which Hinduism was being manipulated politically in this country. But today the urgency has become that much greater because a party that officially professes Hindutva is ruling us with an overwhelming majority, and they have changed the political discourse about Hinduism to one which reduces Hinduism to their narrow political agenda. And it seemed to me that unless Hindus like me, who for the longest time had said we practice our faith in private, it's not the business of the public, unless we come out publicly, we were essentially ceding the space, abdicating the space to a party that was bigoted and narrow.
So at the heart of the book seems to be the argument that Hindus have to reclaim Hinduism from Hindutva.
Precisely the core argument.
There could be an argument that that is a political construct. There is a review of your book that you yourself have shared on social media, which says that the first half of Shashi's book is brilliantly academic, and the second half he's wearing his hat as a politician. Your avatar as a public intellectual and that as a party politician have to be colliding at times. So, for example, you talk a lot about what you argue the BJP has done to, in a sense, debase your kind of Hinduism. You don't talk that much, or you don't talk at all, some would say, about how the Congress has similarly debased faiths by playing politics. Shah Banu continues to haunt you till this day. The Congress is still trying to find its way around triple talaq. So, how much of Shashi the politician came in the way of Shashi the author while writing this book?
That's a fair question, Barkha. I mean, in all fairness, I could turn around to Shashi the author and say, if you look at India from Midnight to Millennium, I've been very critical of the Congress party.
Which is quoted back at you all the time.
It's quoted back at me all the time. And
especially your comments on Indira Gandhi.
On Shah Banu and on the emergency and a number of those things. I didn't agree with the Congress party, but I wasn't a congressman then. Now that I've joined the party, yes, there is a certain loyalty to the party that I belong to and work for, because you come to the conclusion that the larger interests of the country and the values you believe in would be better served if the Congress party were in charge of the country than if those who profess these, who give aid and comfort to the Gaurakshaks, as it were, remain in charge. That's essentially the difference. So yes, to that degree, this is not the time for me to dredge up my old criticisms on Shah Banu. I have certainly not resiled from my criticism. They remain on the record. My books are still in print. But I don't need to drag it up again today, in my view.
The reason it may come up again today is because your book does talk about the Uniform Civil Code. And there are liberals in this country, self-identified liberals like Ramachandra Guha, who do support a uniform civil code. There are people like me who I believe myself to be a progressive person without getting into sort of party politics, just a progressive person. As a feminist, I believe that every orthodoxy militates against women. I am totally against this instant triple talaq. So do you not think that you're confusing issues here? It's one thing to say this is Hindutva, and it's another thing to say that all liberals have to stand up for a uniform progressive code. Not a uniform Hindu code, a uniform progressive code.
So my answer to that, Barkha, is that certainly in terms of objectives and principles, one can have one's own convictions. I am, as an individual, 100% in favor of a uniform civil code.
You are.
But as a politician, I accept that there needs to be some sensitivity about how we achieve it and when we achieve it. So the objective, it's enshrined in the Constitution as a desirable objective. It's my desirable objective too. But I am sensitive to the fact that before we get there, we will have to take along with us those whose existing personal laws will therefore have to be subsumed into such a code. For us to just go blindly ahead as if their opinions don't matter is not democracy, is not democratic, given that over 70 years, people have felt a certain acquired right to their existing personal laws.
Sometimes,
I have also said that this position is acceptable because the opt-out always exists. If you're a Muslim woman, and you choose not to marry under Muslim personal law, you have the legal right to marry under the existing civil laws of this country. So for me, the test is that the option not to be coerced exists. Coercion is what is wrong. It is not the code itself. So if a Muslim woman, for whatever reasons, including the fact that she is too young to know any better, listens to her parents and marries under Muslim personal law, she is bound by it. But if a more independent-minded woman says, no, I won't, she has the legal right in our free democracy not to. And for me, that's an important intermediate step.
But there are also moments when law has to, in a sense, be ahead of societal attitudes changing. And let's take one of the issues that you have so aggressively and admirably advocated for, which is to decriminalize homosexuality, right? We're not going to wait for everybody in India to agree on this. They continue to be social conservatives. They continue to be people of our parents' and grandparents' generation who may continue to oppose it. There continue to be religious groups who oppose it. But we recognize that a democracy means equality, and equality has to mean decriminalizing homosexuality. Similarly, to me as a woman, equality has to mean that there should be no place for personal laws that discriminate between men and women. So why do you bring in, and is there a problem in a liberalism where you are conflating this sort of philosophical generosity of your faith and juxtaposing it with things that need to go? Why are you confusing these issues?
See, Barkha, the fact is that there's also the question of you lay out your position, you lay out your convictions, and I have done so. I've said at the very beginning that I'm a liberal, not just politically, not even in terms of economics, but in terms of attitude. That I really don't judge people. I accept them as I find them. I indulge them, if you like, in what they want to be or to become. And I give them the full right to say or do whatever they want to, so long as they don't hurt somebody else in the process. And that kind of liberal attitude to life fits in very well with my understanding of Hinduism. Therefore, for example, with homosexuals, I think it's their business how they live, and I don't believe the government has any place in their bedrooms or in our bedrooms. I don't think the government has any place in our kitchens either, or opening our fridges to see what we're eating. I don't think in all of these ways that my principles are in any way affected. The second thing you're asking me is, as a politician, how far will I go? And I'll say I will have to have the common sense to pursue these objectives and these ideals within the framework of what is politically possible.
You can't go further than your party. But you have, you have with 377.
I have with every issue. I push the envelope as far as I can push it. But I'm not going to break with my party on any of these issues. I am going to push, and there are people in my party who disagree with me, and there are many who agree with me.
Okay, I'm going to come to some of these issues later, but I want to go back to the overarching theme, why I am a Hindu. Now, you say, quite interestingly, that one of the reasons that you're a Hindu is not simply because you were technically born as a Hindu, but because it is the faith that you most identify with. It is the only faith that doesn't codify how you think, that its essential fluidity is what draws you to it.
Which, by the way, is something that Mahatma Gandhi also said.
So it's so interesting that you should bring up Gandhi, because I was going to ask you that is Shashi Tharoor, who would have otherwise been classified as a Nehruvian, and we have this sort of construct of Nehruvian secularism, vis-a-vis Gandhi secularism, which was much more that of a believer. So is the Nehruvian Shashi becoming a Gandhian Shashi when it comes to being Hindu?
You see, on this issue, Nehruji personally was agnostic. He really not only had no patience for sadhus and mullahs and maulvis, but he actually also didn't believe in going to temples. He didn't believe in God or prayer, etc. And he made no bones about that. It just wasn't his conviction. But part of his generosity of spirit, if you like, is that he fully accepted that he was surrounded by true believers of various faiths who joined him in the cause. After Maulana Abul Kalam Azad is a Maulana. You've got people like K.M. Munshi and so on, who are profoundly orthodox conservative Hindus who are working with Nehruji in the party. So I think that he understood that his individual view is one thing, and that a political principle that the state shall not have a religion has to be defended on a different basis. Gandhiji's, however, is where we really ended up. What was Gandhiji's secularism? It was, I am a Hindu, but my Hinduism absorbs and accommodates all. So he'll have a bhajan saying, you know, Ishwara Allah Tero Naam, right? He will, so that Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram sounds very Hindu, and the second line suddenly brings Allah into it. That's Gandhiji. And Gandhiji's mixture of bhajans, his use of terms and prayers and hymns from various faiths in his prayer meetings, his extraordinary remark once when he said, I am Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jew, whatever, Parsi, and I think Jinnah it was who tartly remarked, only a Hindu could say that. The fact is that that kind of Hinduism is actually the Hinduism of the Indian state. We say we are secular, but in fact we indulge all faiths. There is a profusion of religions in this country. Everyone accepts that, the government acknowledges it, and de facto the government is interfering in religion everywhere, whether through giving subsidies, though now the Hajj subsidy is being phased out, whether it's giving assistance, for example, for the Hindu pilgrimage to Mansarovar, which is entirely organized by the MEA, and so on and so forth. The government is very much implicated in all religions.
But for you, Shashi, and for the Congress, has there been a realization that that old-style secularism, seen through Nehru's eyes, that very sort of St. Stephen's College, and I'm from college as well, so I say this in a sort of self-mocking way. You know, where progressive meant a kind of rootlessness, a kind of deracinated, you know, where westernization, if you will, right? Where we weren't even aware of our own colonization. We weren't even aware of how subconsciously in this effort to become global citizens, we'd actually just been, you know, bulldozed into homogeneity of a Western kind, I believe. And I'm just wondering how much of this has been a personal change for you to discover the Gandhi version of Hinduism in you as opposed to the Nehru version of faith.
No, Barkha, in fact, I think that we're actually more cosmopolitan than you give us credit for being, and not just in the Western sense. I mean, I used to wear nothing but kurtas in college all the time.
We all wore kurtas.
Right. So what I'm saying
we all wore kurtas, but our thinking language was English.
Yes.
And continues to be. We were not enough in touch with our regional languages. Our own. I certainly learned how to speak Punjabi very late. I don't know about you.
My Malayalam has improved by leaps and bounds after I had to, you know, when I got.
And look at the texts we read. I studied literature, and in our curriculums, we were, you know, we never read our myths. I read the Greeks before I read the Ramayana and Mahabharata.
There I was an exception. I did read a lot of Mahabharata and Ramayana and Tenali Raman and
But not because you were taught it. Not because you were taught it.
One had to go out of the curriculum.
That's my point.
Out of the regular habits.
That's my point.
Yeah. And that was something that I was struck by, because there weren't that many good sources either, and they were not terribly well printed or in good English by comparison with the attractive texts of the Western world. But you know, even if there was that deracination, I hope this book will demonstrate that I have overcome the deracination through my own effort of reflection and reading. I don't, you know, in this book, I don't really move away from interweaving the personal with the academic, as it were, in that I talk about my own discovery of faith, my own struggles with certain questions, my discussions with my father. I also, who was a very devout Hindu, but I also talk about learning by observation, including his own attitude to other faiths, and learning, frankly, from the books I've read, extensively in translations of our religious texts, and to some degree, the works of the great Mahatmas of our faith, the religious leaders whose teachings and precepts, particularly Vivekananda and Adi Shankara, but various others in between in my quotes.
You quote T.N. Madan, and you write, and that part really spoke to me, because I do believe that is a realization that many Indian liberals are having to confront, that there was a certain rigidity to a certain kind of secularism. There's almost a certain dogma to us, as much as dogma can be to faith, there's a dogma to secularism, and that Professor T.N. Madan argues that has in fact marginalized the entire argument of pluralism, because it's alienated too many people. Do you believe, Shashi Tharoor, that you and the Congress party, let me add a political question here, need to find the language of faith to speak to Indians in, and for far too long the Congress has not been speaking that language?
Well, I think find is almost the wrong word here. I think we need to reveal what we already know instinctively and practice ourselves. So I know from private conversations that Rahul Gandhi is genuinely a Shiv Bhakt. The country has discovered it because he's openly talking about it now. Should he have, should he not have? That's a political conversation. But the
you don't see it as soft. You don't see it as a political idiom more than a revelation of a personal faith.
Well, look, I would say that political tactics are always there for every party. It doesn't necessarily fully reveal who one is. Rahul Gandhi is a far more complex person than just going to Shiv temples. He, for example, is a practitioner of Buddhist Vipassana. Not our homegrown variants, but something he goes and practices in Buddhist Southeast Asia, for example. Now, he's got these complex ideas about religion. He's thought deeply about religion. He can have a very interesting argument with you about religion anytime. But as a political figure, he's not found it necessary to show it to the nation. Similarly, when it comes to the fundamental convictions of the Congress party that this country belongs to everybody, versus, say, the tactic that appears to have been used during the Gujarat campaign of not at all emphasizing Muslim issues. Now, there are some of us in the Congress who might disagree with that, but we have to respect a political party's right to choose its own tactics at a particular moment at a particular time.
So I was going to push you exactly on those 2 points. One is that when it was revealed that Rahul Gandhi is a Shiv Bhakt, a party spokesperson also spoke about how he's a Jnanodhari,
that was unfortunate, I think.
Yes, because it's a caste hierarchical reference.
Precisely. I would never have been content to echo those kinds of words.
Was Rahul comfortable with that reference?
I didn't ask him. I mean, I do know that on the Shiv Bhakt business, that, as I said, I've had conversations with him. I've never discussed issues of caste, which I think, frankly, his own great-grandfather, Nehruji, had really hoped would disappear from India, and which has simply got deeply entrenched even further. I don't think the Congress party needs to add to the casteism that's already rampant.
So you don't agree with that reference that was made about this?
I have no problem with talking about religion. I have no problem with Rahulji going to temples. I would not have mentioned Jnanodhari.
How do you respond to the charge that the Congress is practicing soft Hindutva, that in that tactical choice to not emphasize Muslim issues in the Gujarat campaign, to make the temple visits very much part of a larger political photo opportunity? The fact that Karnataka Chief Minister Siddaramaiah is not just using the word Hinduism, he's actually using the word Hindutva, and he's saying there's no soft or hard Hindutva, it's just Hindutva, and he's actually going against your book. He's using the words Hinduism and Hindutva interchangeably.
Well, actually, strictly
speaking, is there a soft Hindutva? Is there a realization in the Congress that for too long you have been removed from the language that many people identify with? Maybe even if you have that language personally, you haven't used it politically.
Yeah, so my answer to that would simply be that it's actually, again, framing the question in a way that suits the Hindutva vadis. To my mind, yes, you could do what Mr. Siddaramaiah does and understand Hindutva quite literally as simply meaning Hinduness, yes, which in other words is Hinduism.
Yes.
But my distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva when I speak in English is simply to make the point that Hinduism, as I understand it, and as I've described it with a lot of textual support in the book, is a far more inclusive, accommodative, pluralist faith than Hindutva, the political ideology. And I do want to stress that Hindutva is a political ideology. Savarkar, who came up with the concept in the first place, was not a terribly religious man, and he said so. In fact, he said Hindu religion is merely a subset of a much larger Hinduness, which basically is cultural and, as he saw it, racial in origin. Then you've got, of course, the subsequent evolution of Hindutva political ideology. Golwalkar went the other way and said, no, the religion is the mother lode, as it were, and the culture is only a subset. And then you got Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who invented a whole new philosophy called integral humanism, which was anchored very much in the core concepts of Hinduism, the religion, the Purusharthas, and so on. Now, no difficulty with any of that. In fact, I think there's a lot in Deen Dayal Upadhyay's writings that are entirely reasonable, that you and I would have no difficulty with. But there is a fundamental difference between the Hinduism of the founding fathers of our constitution and the Hindutva of these ideologues. Golwalkar and Deen Dayal Upadhyay explicitly rejected the constitution. Not just because, and they also said this, that it's a westernized document written by Anglophile lawyers.
They thought the constitution needed changes, not that they rejected the constitution.
They said it is based on a fundamentally flawed premise, and that is the idea of the nation that it embodies. What Upadhyay said very explicitly, and Golwalkar had said the same thing earlier, is that this constitution is written with the basis that the nation is a territory called India and all the people on it. Whereas he says a nation is not a territory, it is a people, and the people are the Hindu people. Now this is such a fundamental presumption, a fundamental difference about what India is all about, and indeed what the Hindu faith is all about, that the two are simply incompatible. There's not a difference of degree, there's a difference of kind. You on the one hand have a constitution that covers the entire land of India and everybody who lives on it, irrespective of their faith. And then you say the only kind of constitution that's acceptable is one that starts off with the premise, this is a Hindu nation, these are the Hindu people, here's a Hindu Rashtra for which we're writing a constitution, and everybody else is a guest or an interloper, or for that matter, an intruder and an invader. Now, these are two different incompatible ideas. It is not possible to say on the one hand that the constitution is my holy book, as the Prime Minister does, and say on the same sentence practically that Deen Dayal Upadhyaya is my ideological hero, because you cannot, in that case, accept the Constitution as your holy book, because the fundamental foundation of the Constitution you don't accept.
So you're saying the Prime Minister can't both admire Deen Dayal Upadhyaya and call the Constitution his holy book?
Or he has to reject this particular belief of Deen Dayal
But you are with a party whose leader you have not always admired, Indira Gandhi. So, I mean, these contradictions abound in politics. You can take things that you agree with and not agree with.
Has Mr. Modi said that? Mr. Modi has actually encouraged every ministry to study the works and writings of Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. He has been uncritical in his admiration and expressions of admiration. He's talked about, even today, the president's speech, which is written for him by the government, this president's speech at the start of the budget session, says, you know, proceeding in the direction laid out for us by Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. Come on.
Your book actually goes so far as to argue that you believe the Constitution, I think the word you use is unscathed. The Constitution cannot remain unscathed.
For this reason.
By what you believe is very much a larger, if quiet, Hindu Rashtra project. There are those who might say you're being alarmist. There is parliament, there are institutions, there is the judiciary. But that to me is one hell of a big statement to make, that you actually believe that there is a Hindu Rashtra project, that it is very much underway, and that the Indian Constitution may not remain unscathed. What did you exactly mean by that?
Well, they'll need the votes. I mean, basically to get the Constitution amended.
And there have been constitutional amendments. The word secularism was added in the 70s, as you well know.
But you see, amendments are one thing.
Yeah.
Even in any case, to amend the Constitution, you still need the 2/3 of the Parliament of both houses, and then you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So this is, in any case, a process that has to go through various filters before it's actually amended. If the BJP wants to pursue the amendment route, it needs, first of all, 2/3 of the Parliament, it needs 3/4 of the states. And that's well in the process of accumulating both of these. One of the interesting questions that comes to my mind is, if you're sincere that really Deen Dayal Upadhyaya's analysis of what was wrong with the Constitution is fundamentally correct, because you believe everything the gentleman said is gospel for you, then surely you cannot leave the Constitution untouched. Because it is indeed everything that Deen Dayal Upadhyaya and M.S. Golwalkar criticized it for being. It is a document infused with Western ideas of liberty and equality and fraternity. It is a document that enshrines the equality of all the religious people and all the religions in this country and every community in this country. And therefore, subsequent interpretations of successive Supreme Courts have enshrined all those principles and entrenched them even more deeply. Now, if you're accepting the fact that this is the constitutional premise of this country, then you're rejecting the person you're hailing every day. Or you're actually sincere in your devotion and your profession of loyalty to the beliefs of, in this case, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, in which case you cannot leave this constitution untouched. Because this constitution continuing this way is a standing rebuke to
Are you actually worried for the sanctity of the constitution?
Yes, very much.
In real terms and not just...
If indeed the BJP is able to achieve the strength in Parliament and in the states that it hopes to achieve, and that I must admit it seems to be in the states doing very well, with 19 states currently under its control, then definitely it will not hesitate to embark on a project of essentially rewriting the Constitution. This is definitely, in my view, a long-term conviction, and they can turn around and say, we told you so, we told you we are following in the footsteps of Upadhyaya. And this is exactly what he wanted us to do.
Well, it's a grave thought, and I'll leave it there, because anything else is sort of theorizing about something we don't know right now. But talking about holy books, Hinduism doesn't have one, right?
There's many.
doesn't have one. That's why I said, I mean, when I said it doesn't have one, I didn't mean it doesn't have any, but it has many. Because of that, there is no do's and don'ts in the classic sense. One of the arguments that you make is, therefore, you quote historian D.N. Jha, of course, but you say that as a vegetarian, you think that it's not correct to invoke Hinduism to tell people who may want to eat beef not to eat beef.
Again, Gandhiji said the same thing. Gandhiji was also a vegetarian, just like me. Gandhiji also felt very strongly, in fact, he felt far more strongly than I do, about the sanctity of the cow. He truly regarded it as his mother and so on. But he at the same time said, it would not be right for me as a Hindu and a vegetarian to impose my convictions on the various people in this country of other faiths and backgrounds and other cultural practices. And that very much is compatible with the constitutional and Hindu approach.
And I would agree with you, but I'm going to again push you, because this book is part Shashi the author and part Shashi the politician, and I will push Shashi the politician to answer why your party will not take an unambiguously liberal position on the right of people to eat what they want, to have sex with who they want to drink if they wish, as consenting adults, to decriminalize homosexuality. There is no party position. In fact, you have had individual leaders like Digvijay Singh who actually boasted of how it was Congress states that were ahead of the BJP in banning the consumption of beef.
I think that you're quite right about that, because it's a reflection of the somewhat different cultures of different parts of the country. In Kerala, the Congress party is indeed unambiguous about this, and I have stood up and made speeches, even as a vegetarian, saying that you have the right to eat what you want to eat.
But to be liberal is to say, I may not eat beef, but if you want to, it's okay with me.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
That is what you're saying.
So in Kerala, I've been quite unambiguous in saying that. And I suspect that in the northeastern states, the Congress party has no problem saying that.
In the northeastern states, even the BJP, even the BJP says it.
But in Madhya Pradesh and UP, yes, exactly, the BJP is saying it in northeastern Goa.
Yes.
Mr. Parrikar has been talking about the virtues of good beef in Goa,
Yes.
But the fact is that you have a real problem in the Hindi heartland. And so the Congress party says, yes, we are absolutely in favor of you taking the stand where you can afford to take it, and tactically we're not going to take it where we can't afford it.
Some would call that hypocrisy.
Yes, but who says politics is not free of hypocrisy?
But here's the point, and this is just an article I wrote in the wake of the Padmavati sort of debate, and I'll come to that, is that I'm asking, where are India's liberal politicians? Where is that politician?
There is one.
Yeah, I knew you'd say that. Okay, let me frame it differently. Where are India's liberal parties, political parties? Because where is that party who's actually going to stand up and say, we stand for the right of choice? The Supreme Court recently did that by placing individual liberty within the right to privacy.
Exactly.
And that was extraordinary. But there is no political party who's willing to do that consistently. You're saying you're a liberal. Do you actually disagree, therefore, with every kind of ban or censorship that we've had? You quote Hussain at great length in this book, and how you reconcile M.F. Hussein's sort of the nudity around Hindu goddesses with your faith as a Hindu. But you don't mention Salman Rushdie, you don't mention Taslim. I know you have in other spaces,
Exactly.
but you haven't in this book.
In this book, because Rushdie was, frankly, nothing to do with Hinduism. His was a quarrel, if you like, within Islam and within what is permissible to say in Islam and not, and that wasn't what my book was all about. But I have indeed stood up for Rushdie, as he himself knows, on numerous occasions and forums, and I've stood up for him with obviously to the dismay of some people who otherwise would agree with me on other issues. So I've spoken up for both Rushdie and the other example often cited is Taslim Nasreen. I was completely against the banning of Lajja, which I thought was a very passionate and sincere and honest book. But having said all of this, the point is that unfortunately our politics is a reflection of how ready political leaders feel the people are. And there is this great fear of the inability to maintain law and order. Sometimes I do blame governments, and I've done so again in the latest Padmavati riots, I've done so on the record, that governments have a responsibility that they have manifestly failed to fulfill. They should have taken more effective preventive measures. Organizations were threatening violence, and then they went ahead to conduct that violence, and they could not be stopped. You can't have the government standing by helplessly, because the one thing that separates a civilized modern state from anarchy is precisely the ability to maintain law and order when it's threatened. You cannot have a state in which people can openly and with impunity threaten violence, conduct violence against school buses, burn Haryana road-based buses. All of these things have happened.
Yet there's a perception that from Rahul Gandhi downwards, the Congress is not willing to take on the Karni Sena, that there is a by-election in Rajasthan. There could be an election in Rajasthan later this year. There is a whole Rajput pride, and imagined grievances. The film is a complete eulogy to Rajputs, actually, but this is how politics plays out. So, again and again, what you're writing, I don't know that you're able to apply it to your own political life and to your own political party.
Well, I can say very clearly that, that very often the answer is indeed no, I'm not able to, because there is what is politically possible and there is what is tactically feasible at a particular time. You're absolutely right to talk about the fact that the Congress, at a time when the BJP and the Karni Sena were sniping at each other in the lead up to the two by-elections for which voting took place on Monday, why would the Congress want to come in the way? I mean, I'm just asking as a pure political tactic. I know what my convictions are, but even though when I was in Rajasthan, I was invited to comment on this, I was careful not to interpose myself. And bullets are flying in two directions. You don't want to stand in the middle and get hit. Let them shoot at each other. That's a political tactic that's perfectly understandable. But you see, Barkha, the world of ideas, the world of the public intellectual you talk about, has a value in and of itself. I am the only one perhaps who foolishly or otherwise has maintained a foot in that world while trying to move forward with a foot in the political camp.
Do you feel suffocated? Does your mind feel suffocated by the politics you're expected to practice?
I've asked myself this question earlier. I did, after all, have a choice. I was not a dyed-in-the-wool politician. I don't come from a political family. There's no political pedigree. No one was expecting me to go into politics. When I was, somewhat to my surprise, invited to enter the world of politics, what was my choice? At that time, I could have continued writing books, making speeches, and impacting that small sliver of society that would read my books and listen to my speeches. Maybe I hadn't fully anticipated the reach of YouTube, but even then. Having said that, through politics, I knew I would have a small part, perhaps, or at least some part to play in helping influence both the national conversation and the decisions that could be made that would change people's lives. For me, therefore, it was a no-brainer. I had to go into politics. Many a friend in the world of public intellectuals and writers and so on has upbraided me, saying, how could you do this? But many of them have come up to me and said, we wouldn't have had the courage to do this. Go for it. Even when we disagree with you publicly in your political avatar, we're so glad you're out in that space saying what you say. I had one conversation like this with a very eminent Indian writer just 2 days ago in Jaipur. So I know there are people who feel this way and who've taken the trouble to
No, I'm not anti-politics, but I'm saying that I question the absence of consistency in political articulation. And the fact...
My articulation has always been consistent.
Not yours personally, but as political positions, political positions go, it's difficult to attack party A if you're going to be a B version of that same party. And that's, as one of the BJP ministers said when Mr. Gandhi was doing the temple tour in Gujarat, he said, well, imitation is the best form of flattery, but wouldn't people then prefer the original?
For the original, yeah. But that's only if you see it in those terms. If what we're actually saying is, we are just as Hindu as they claim to be, except that our Hinduism is broader, more inclusive and therefore more Hindu than their Hindutva, which is actually bigoted, violent, excluding others. That is a different message from soft Hindutva. We're not, in other words, trying to be the same sort of Hindu that they are. We are trying to be the opposite sort of Hindu and saying ours is the real Hinduism.
So you're saying that you, Shashi Tharoor, and your party, the Congress party, is more Hindu than Prime Minister Modi and the BJP?
In a genuine sense, in the sort of Hinduism that Swami Vivekananda preached, absolutely yes. In the sort of Hinduism that Mahatma Gandhi practiced, absolutely yes. The book lays out very clearly on what it is that I'm staking this claim. What are the foundational beliefs, values, spiritual prescriptions, histories from which this, our secularism has never been the French laïcité, this completely cutting off of religion. It in fact is not dharma nirpekshata, the criticism that has been applied against the secularism. It has always been a secularism that indulged a profusion of religions. That Hinduism is very much our Hinduism, and we have no reason either to hide it or to be ashamed of it. But it is a secularism that is completely, or a Hinduism that is completely at home in a liberal constitution, in the democracy that is India, and amongst the plural communities amongst whom we live and work.
How did this narrative get built up of the Congress being an anti-Hindu party?
So there is this whole idea that the Congress has spent a lot of its time, quote unquote, appeasing the minorities. Frankly, if the Congress had done a fraction of what it's accused of having done, the minorities would not be in the kind of bad shape that the Sachar Commission has reported about the Muslims and so on. So there is a fundamental flaw in that attack. But having said that, there is a big difference, it seems to me, between this idea that we are a Hindu country and we may, if we choose, tolerate some others, versus we are a Hindu country and that means accepting others. Swami Vivekananda actually put it brilliantly. In 1893, in his famous speech in Chicago, he said, "My faith is one that teaches not just tolerance, but acceptance." Because tolerance, which of course is a virtue, is still a very patronizing thing. It says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in the right to be wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas acceptance says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And that, to my mind, is the fundamental difference. With this approach, we can get along. With the other approach, one is always on top, either indulging the other or pushing him down. And to my mind, this is the difference between the Congress and the BJP.
But do you also believe that the Congress, the people got cynical about the Congress, because while I agree that socioeconomic indices show that Indian Muslims are not really well off, there is a sort of orthodoxy even in the Muslim community that tends to hijack the conversation and speak on their behalf. And many Muslim friends I have say, so-and-so doesn't speak for me. Why do you call them on TV? Or why do you interview them? Why do you give them time? But they hijack the conversation and the party, your party, ends up supporting people like that. You know, so Shah Bano was a mistake. Are you confronting the same danger with triple talaq? Because really, there is no reason to uphold this practice, this sort of medieval practice that has been abolished in 20 plus countries, including in Pakistan.
Well, I don't think there's any sympathy for triple talaq as a practice. I think
Why do you insist? Why does your party insist to send it to a select committee? What is there left to discuss in it?
They wanted to see what the larger agenda was, which they suspect is there. You see, the BJP has never been a particularly great fan of the Muslim community. Why have they picked on this particular issue to go forward with? I would say that there are many issues involving Muslim women where we would very much share the conviction that reform is necessary if the community wants it, or in this case, if Muslim women want it. But there are some flaws in the hastily drafted bill we've got. For example, the decision to criminalize a civil problem.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, after all, why does a person do a triple talaq? Because he wants to be rid of this marriage. You're going to now criminalize him and pop him in jail. Either way, the poor lady who's resisting the triple talaq is suddenly left in the lurch because he's not going to be supporting her from the jail either.
Yeah.
So some of these questions don't appear to have been thought through or discussed. There may or may not be a better solution than what's in the bill, or there might be a way of simply upholding the Supreme Court's judgment while preserving some of the rights of Muslim women by writing those into the law, rather than this emphasis on punishment, which is often a sort of cheap popularity gaining thing. You know, after Nirbhaya, we had the appalling juvenile justice bill, which essentially condemns kids into the adult justice system. All of this is a reaction. We must show that we are tough. We must show we must punish. Is punishment the best answer? Have we thought it through? Now, in the Lok Sabha, the BJP has a crushing majority, so they got their way. In the Rajya Sabha, they don't, so they're forced to have to discuss it. And that's what committees are for. A parliamentary committee can go into it in some detail and see what comes up with it. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I've recently met with a Muslim women's group that came to me on the criminal practice of female genital mutilation that's taking place in the bodies. Yes. And I promised to support them through moving a private member's bill or raising the issue in Parliament as the opportunity presents itself. So I have no problem with reforming issues involving the people who they themselves have come to me. But when the BJP suddenly becomes the greatest defenders of Muslim women, I do feel a little bit of curiosity as to what lies behind this.
Talking about private members' bill, you try to move not just once but twice on decriminalizing homosexuality. Did you feel you obviously felt let down by the BJP, but did you also feel let down by the Congress? Because politicians go on and on about an over-activist judiciary that has encroached on your territory. But when it came to, doing this, when I say you, I mean the Parliament clearly passed the buck to the courts.
Correct. And I do think that in this particular instance, it was a confirmation of the fact that in our country, very often the judiciary, because they don't have to look for votes and they don't have to worry about losing votes, is often more able to take courageous stands to move society forward than the elected legislators. In fact, it was very clear, as you said, not just once but twice in Parliament, that neither did the Liberals have the strength of their convictions to show up to vote. It is a Friday afternoon, which is one of the curses of the whole private members' bill system. It comes up on Friday afternoons and many are
But if they wanted to, they could have been there. It doesn't matter that it's Friday afternoon.
And then the other thing is, of course, the determined opposition of a very strong element within the ruling party, which made a noise, turned up in large numbers and voted against, and came clearly with an intention of doing so.
Now, in the end, I want to take you back to the sense of this deracinated liberal and her or him finding a crisis in today's world, whether it's the ascent of Trump, it's the ascent of populism, a kind of nativism globally. This isn't, you know, this is happening everywhere. When did you first feel in your life that maybe you needed a different language to talk to people in, that maybe your language was too elite, that maybe you were, as my friend Ashok Malik famously coined it, part of the Khan market consensus and you needed to go beyond it?
You know, Barkha, as far as language is concerned, quite literally, I write and speak pretty much the language that comes most instinctively to me, and it is what it is. Whereas, as you know, in Kerala, to win elections in Thiruvananthapuram, I speak Malayalam, and not a terribly Sahitya or elite Malayalam, far from it. Very much the language of Malayalam is picked up in the streets and in conversation. And ultimately, one has both sides to one's approach. I've sort of gingerly begun speaking a lot more Hindi in public places now than I ever used to.
And yet you have opposed Sushma Swaraj on Hindi being a language of the UN.
For all the reasons that I hope were made clear in my opposition, number one, we haven't suffered any disadvantage from Hindi not being an official language. She wants to spend 400 crores for what? If she or Narendra Modi, or for that matter Vajpayee 15 years ago, wanted to speak Hindi at the UN, an Indian diplomat would interpret that into English and then the rest of the translations would follow. You don't need to have it adopted as an official language that every single document and notice gets translated into Hindi. Third, when you go and speak at the UN, why are you doing that? You're there to communicate to the world. All you'll be doing in Hindi is talking to yourself and to the TV audience back home, which is perhaps what they really want. It's about the TV audience back in the Hindi-speaking states of India feeling proud, but it's not about actually trying to persuade the outside world. You won't get Arun Jaitley speaking Hindi at the World Bank meetings, where he actually has to talk to international bankers.
But the Prime Minister spoke in Hindi at Davos.
Yeah, I personally think that had much more to do with the domestic audience and with the international one.
Or maybe that's the language he prefers.
It is very much the language I prefer.
So why not just speak in the language that anyone prefers?
Well, by that logic, in a 193 country organization, you'd have Babel. So you have a limited number of official languages, and you have only 2 working languages, which are English and French. Now, it so happens that one of the working languages of the UN is an official language in India. So it's actually very easy for your diplomats, your officials, your ministers to use that language and be understood by a large number, often a majority
I know,
of
but
those
English
listening.
is not everybody's thinking language.
But nor is Hindi, Barkha. I mean, the fact is that 50% of this country does not think in Hindi, did not grow up speaking Hindi, does not read and write Hindi well. What happens if a Chidambaram or a Pranab Mukherjee were to represent India at the UN? You've just spent 400 crores making this language official and your own representative is unable to speak in it? You know, we have to accept that Hindi is not the only language in India, that this is a multilingual country and that you are essentially, by enshrining one language internationally, you're depriving every Indian who is an authentic representative of India but can't speak that language from the right to represent you on the world stage. That seems to me a completely unnecessary disqualification.
What made you dabble in Hindi then?
No, well, look, I did happen to study in Delhi at St. Stephen's College with you, picked up some Hindi on the streets.
My Hindi is quite decent, actually.
You're from the north, I'm a good
Yes.
Dakshin Bharati. Yeah. My Hindi is, I have at my mind, as somebody whose mother tongue is Malayalam and whose first language otherwise is English, my mind just can't get into the whole concept of gender. Why on earth should a table be masculine and a bed be feminine or vice versa? I don't even know which it is. There is no earthly reason for me that object should necessarily have a gender. And therefore, when I speak Hindi, the one thing that makes me most self-conscious is precisely that I know that 80% of the time I'll be guessing the gender wrong. And I'm not even sure why I should be, changing a an R into an E for that purpose. So these are the kinds of challenges that people from other language traditions would face. But nonetheless, I've been doing it simply because, for example, when the Hindi edition of my last book, An Era of Darkness, came out, Andhakar Kal, Bharat mein British Samrajya, how could I possibly be talking about it in English? It made no sense.
And you used a Hindi phrase to say why the Kohinoor will never come back. You said there are chor bazaars in all Europe.
Pura nagar bhare hue hain chor bazaar. But anyway, the point is that our country's multilingualism, I think, is a fact of life. So if we can speak as many Indian languages as possible, power to us. If we can't, I mean, I'm very pleased and impressed that Sushma Swaraj says proudly, after going to be a candidate in Karnataka for one of the by-elections, that she picked up Kannada and she can speak in Kannada. Now, that's great. There are very few North Indians who can boast of such an accomplishment. The three-language formula would have required UP and Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh to say teach Tamil or Malayalam in their classrooms. Does even one school in any of these states do so? No. So the fact is, national unity requires that we don't impose one language on the rest. We celebrate all languages and give every one of them a chance.
How do we talk about being a Hindu without talking about caste?
I did talk about caste,
but you haven't. You don't really do a deep dive into caste. And, you know, even when we look at what's happening today, whether it's Padmavati, we've all spent our time debating whether this film honors Rajput valor. This is a caste community we're talking about. The Trinamool Congress is now endorsing Brahman Sammelans, right? So I feel that along with this sort of re-embrace of the language of religion, there seems to be a kind of subtle re-embrace of the language of caste. Have you seen Padmavati, by the way?
Not yet. Not yet. But okay, let me say, Barkha, on this. That, frankly, I mean, you know, I'm not sure it's the kind of film I would normally have seen.
But now it's
there's a good reason to see it because one wants to understand what the fuss is all about.
But it's a running theme. Yeah. It's actually it's like a film made to honor the Rajput community and their sense of their own history, right? They could be
and
different.
Apparently a very patriarchal, male-centered view of the history.
Well, the Johar, the mass immolation that happens in the end, that has been the flashpoint of debate. You know, so you have to see it. I won't give away spoilers to those who haven't seen it. And we can have a separate debate on that.
Already, a very good friend of mine told me his sister walked out to the movie because she found it too gory and unpleasant. Presumably,
the mass immolation is extremely disturbing, and it needs a whole separate discussion, because as a woman I was very disturbed, but you have to remind yourself it's set in another time where this used to happen. And like I said, we all stood up for the right of a filmmaker to make the film he wanted to make. Whether we like the film, agree with the film, disagree with the film is really beside the point. The question is slightly different. Caste. And there is that familiar accusation against even Mahatma Gandhi that there was this kind of acceptance of the Varna system. Yes, it was meant to be occupational, not. So my last question has to be that you know, there has been this sort of very, you know, you've said everything that you love and admire about your faith. Is there something about your faith that bothers you, that you feel the reform hasn't taken place at the pace it should have? Yeah,
so caste does bother me. And I've talked about that in the book, but I agree briefly. My father's generation, which was the generation of the independence movement, I mean, he dropped his caste surname in college just before independence. Gandhiji was exhorting people to do that. And he certainly brought my sisters and me up to be completely oblivious to caste, unaware of it. Never was the caste of any of our classmates or friends mentioned when they came home to play as children, etc. We only became aware of caste somewhat later, and I have mentioned that. I must say that I share very much the Nehruvian view that caste should have been
abolished,
excised from public consciousness.
Made irrelevant.
But in fact, the opposite has happened. In fact, curiously, democracy has helped entrench caste because caste became an instrument of political mobilization. If you were seeking votes from your fellow caste wallas, then you were essentially reinforcing their identity. From there came the steps of choosing candidates from certain castes to appeal to certain constituencies and so on. And now it's become even an embodiment of privilege or lack thereof because of the Mandal Commission's enshrining of caste as one more area of getting reservations. So now when you look at all of this, you say, my gosh, where have we come? Certainly far from the Nehruvian vision of where caste should be. But I also discovered that, for example, the obliviousness to caste with which I was brought up is itself a marker of privilege.
And elitism.
That now, as a Dalit blogger said, and I've quoted her, no Dalit can grow up oblivious of caste. How dare you wallow in your luxury of being able to be indifferent to caste. So now I've realized, fair enough, I should be. But that doesn't mean, for example, I've never asked the caste of any of my domestic staff before hiring them. I don't go around asking whether it's a Dalit who's cooked my food or not. Yeah. And if I did, I'd be ashamed of myself for doing so. So I'm very entrenched in some of those convictions. It can sometimes work paradoxically wrongly. I mean, I never checked the caste of any of the people I hired for my office in Trivandrum. Big mistake, because it turned out they were all of the same caste as me, except that I didn't know that.
And therefore you ended up looking casteist without meaning to be.
Without meaning to be. So all of these things are issues. But the thing that I say in this book, because it's about Hinduism, is that there is very, very strong scriptural evidence to suggest that caste is much more an emanation of society and not of the faith, and that in the faith there is both instruction and anecdote to demonstrate that caste actually should be disregarded. I talk about the famous story of Adi Shankara marching, with his followers, and a Chandala, a Dalit, essentially is also walking in the opposite direction, and his people, his followers, say to the Chandala rudely, "Get out of my way, get out of Adi Shankara's way, the Guru's way." And the Chandala refuses, and he stops and says to Adi Shankara, "Is not the self within me the same as the self within you, the Atman within you?" And Adi Shankara says, "You have distilled the essential teachings I've been trying to instruct people. You are my guru," and he prostrates himself before the Chandala. There's one example. The other is this great story of how Krishna gives a boon to a classmate, or a friend. I mean, classmate is the wrong word, a friend, that he will give him water whenever he is thirsty. Now, this friend is a bit of a wanderer. He's going off and he's somewhere in some deep forest and has no source of water, and he's very thirsty, so he invokes the boon. But nothing happens. Krishna doesn't emerge, giving him water. So he carries on, he's feeling exhausted and thirsty. And suddenly from the depths of the forest, a dirty hunter comes out, clad in animal skins and rags, and offers him some sort of liquid from an animal skin pouch. And of course, our hero, this Brahmin, very haughtily says, "No, I won't take this from this low-caste hunter." The hunter says, "You're thirsty, you can have this." And, "No, go away, I shan't take it from you," etc. And after a while he goes away, and this man is mentally cursing Lord Krishna for not having kept his word, when Lord Krishna appears and says, "I had sent to Indra in the guise of the hunter, and that was not just water he was offering you, it was Amrit. Yeah. You've turned down the chance of immortality by paying attention to externalities like caste and appearance and the birthplace of the hunter. For that you will be punished, you will be denied immortality." And Lord Krishna goes. Now these kinds of stories, and there's many, many more, in the book basically make the point that caste is not intrinsic. In fact, in many ways, there's evidence in the Hindu faith that disregards caste. So to my mind, I am not at all a casteist. I refuse to practice or believe in any virtues of caste. I accept that obliviousness is privilege, and therefore I don't stress it. But I will say that you don't have to believe in caste to be a Hindu. If you're a Hindu who rejects caste, you're still a good Hindu.
That is, I think, a good note to end this fascinating conversation on. Why I'm a Hindu by Shashi Tharoor is a fascinating book. Do read it, even if you disagree with it. We haven't yet stopped being an argumentative democracy, and hopefully we never shall. Shashi, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.